Hello everyone and welcome to a fluttering new episode of the StudioMEcast. I'm your host Peter, joining you from StudioME Speakeasy here in East Liberty. And if you like the look and sound of this podcast, you can book your own on our website through StudioME.me. And we also, as I've reminded you in the previous episodes, have opened our first new satellite studio, the Meetup, which if you look at your screen right now, you'll be able to see some of the look of what we got there. It's got all of our top of the line, like all the most advanced technology that we've worked on all over the years for our podcasting, so make sure you check that out. It's brand new, it's just opened in Oakland, it's exciting, so go ahead and check that out if you care to. But enough of all that, because today I'm joined by another special guest in our speakeasy here at StudioME. I'm joined by Matt Schultz. He is an actor, writer, producer. He's also part of Locust Street, a name that you've heard mentioned on a few episodes before with previous guests such as Jeff Smee, Jamie Chalmers, Lance, and John Gannan, Lance Parkin and John Gannan. But anyway, we're just going to barely scratch the tip of this iceberg, I'm sure, this time. But for now, I'm just going to jump in and say, Matt, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I've been on a couple of podcasts before, and I'm guessing that Lance probably mentioned this on the session you did with him before, but I've done hundreds of podcasts.
Really? Oh, I'm actually not sure I knew that.
I don't think anyone knew that.
As a guest or hosting?
As a host,
Really?
Lance and I did a podcast for about 2 years or so.
Wow. Is this different from Neon Brainiac? Or is this...
Yes,
Okay.
Very different. Mainly because we had no idea what we were doing, which, I think that kind of fits very well with a lot of the stuff that we were, we've done, where it's like we had no idea what we were doing. And whenever it hits, then we're like, okay, that's the thing. I really appreciate you having me on here.
Well,
Peter.
absolutely. Yeah, it's been, we've been around each other over the years, talked a couple of times, and it's just seemed, I've had you in the back of my mind to have on the podcast for a long time now. And I was like, oh yeah, I should finally reach out to this guy about it. So I'm glad you're here now. Now, something that I think is one thing that a lot of people would recognize you from, or maybe not because of the makeup, but from Theo and the Professor, where you play the professor for that. Something interesting about you that I'd like to talk about, which is you studied history, correct?
Yes.
You triple majored in history, political science, and communications.
Yes.
Why that combination?
Whenever I went to college, I initially knew I wanted to study history. And that was because it was something that just really kind of interested me. Because I thought that it was the best way to understand why everyone is where they are now. Not as a justification, but just kind of a why are things operating as they are now? I was also very involved in local politics and things like that in high school, and that continued on into college, and I realized I'm going to accidentally major in political science, so I might as well do that. And, just kind of looking around at additional majors and realized, well, I could just do communications too. Because my initial plan was to earn a PhD in history after I finished my undergrad career. But a couple things happened. One, I graduated in the horrifying gaping maw of the housing crisis and the Great Recession. And that just was not something that I could feasibly do, right? So I ended up getting a job at the University of Pittsburgh, which is where I went to school. And one of the benefits of working there was that I could take graduate level classes for more or less for free. And I took a couple of graduate level history courses as like for no credit, right? Just gonna get a better idea of what's it mean to be a graduate student in this and I definitely had one of those panic level events after one of those classes concluded where I realized I don't love this. And I realized that
Graduate classes or history or political science don't love what?
Don't love this pursuit enough to continue on with that. Because I wasn't enjoying the graduate courses. I realized that to do this sort of thing, you have to be able to sacrifice, where you want to live. You have to, your number one goal has to be your academic pursuit.
Yeah, it consumes your whole life. Yeah.
Exactly. And I realized that's not what I'm trying to do. And I gotta be honest that I just kind of floundered for a couple years. I was still working regularly. I had my job at the University of Pittsburgh. But I didn't have like a passion. Like I thought I had a passion, but what that passion meant didn't mean what I thought it meant.
So you still had an affection for these subjects of history and political science, like you were locally political. You were interested in history because of searching for a lot of answers, or some understanding anyway.
Right.
But yeah, the pursuit academically wasn't so much worth it to you. Are those subjects things you're still interested in, but just not on like you want to go for a PhD level? Like, do you still have an interest in history and politics?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Like those are so.
But that's not the path.
Right. And it's kind of funny because something else that I sort of realized was that in high school I wanted to be like the movie knower guy. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to be you can talk to me if you like. Hey, I found this new movie. You can talk to me, like, because I've seen a lot of movies.
I see.
I've seen
them.
And I just realized that, like, I didn't care to be, like, the knower guy. Like, I have a super strong interest in history, political history, political science, film, movies, television, all of those things. But being the knower of it, if that makes sense, just lost because I realized that I'm much more of I'd much rather create than know. If that makes sense.
I think I get that. Yeah, there's a point at which you might realize, all right, I've learned a lot of stuff. What am I going to do with it? Yeah. It's I think there's something that I realized at there was a film festival I went to, and there were a lot of people getting like sorry again like
we're playing footsies a little bit. Oh, that's all right.
Sword fighting over here. There's one of the things that I kind of realized was, there's some people who learn everything they possibly can before doing something, and there's such thing as like you don't have to know that much before you start doing something, because you're going to learn while you're doing it anyway. And it's like no matter how much you know, when you start, you're not going to be the master anyway. It's like you can be like there's a big difference between being in the passenger seat of the greatest race car driver in the world for a long time and being like, all right, I've been around this a lot. I know it. I've learned. I've really paid attention. But when you get behind the wheel and you hit 200 miles per hour or whatever you're doing, or just even like the first time you get behind any wheel of a car, you kill yourself. So there's, but I get that like just you had studied, you had learned a lot, and then it sounds like you shifted more into being of creating, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't sort of I realized I shouldn't try to be a repository or a collection of information that I can then move into like a more academic pursuit. It was that I realized I don't care enough about this to make it my life. And then Lance Parkin, who you mentioned earlier, who now for the past 12 years or so, maybe I've been friends with him for 2.5 decades.
Wow.
But we've been like really like creative partners for the past, dozen years or so. He brought up the idea of like, hey, how we would always like hang out and talk about making movies or making TV shows or making whatever, like what if we just did that? And I was like, okay, yeah, all right. Like, again, being very sort of apprehensive because I thought I had this idea and then it fell apart, not knowing, okay, is this something I can commit to, that I want to commit to, that I want to do?
Well, did you find the passion and fulfillment or whatever maybe you were looking for that you didn't find there? Have you found it in film and video with the acting, writing, and producing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I will say, it wasn't an immediate sort of thing because, like you said about like, you can only draw, you can sit next to a NASCAR driver, going around the speed and being like, okay, that's cool, like that's fun, that's whatever, but you just have to like do it. And that was really what I think all of us just kind of did. It was kind of this living sort of like experiment where, I thought, okay, I can act well enough. I think I can write. I think I can like produce to like make sure that things happen. And Jeff Smee, that we both know, has the technical know-how and the background to do the videography and cinematography, and like Lance has the like mind to understand where a story needs to go and needs to do, and that storytelling element, and we just started doing it. And we did our first 48-hour film project. I want to say it was like summer of 2013. I might be off a year. It might have been 2012. And I mean, we made a movie. It's a movie.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's what matters with the 48, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's like, because with the 48, it's something that I think is a really great selling point to get people involved with it. 'Cause you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're going to get. A lot of the time, you're working with people you've never worked with before. you
Right.
know, and it's in a lot of cases. But regardless of how it turns out, it's just a weekend. I mean, for some people on the team, it's a lot of prep and all that. Like I get that, but it's still like it's a weekend of the actual production and editing and work for it. So even if it doesn't turn out the way you want, it's not like you spent years working on a short film that you realized you're just polishing a turd the whole time. It's like it's done. It's like, okay, well, hey, it was a weekend, but it's great because a lot there's some of the best short films I've seen are made through the 48-hour film project. Especially if you get to go to Filmapalooza, the films from around the world, a lot of them are astounding. Not just good for a 48, but the first time I went to Filmapalooza, it was like, these are some of the best short films I've seen in my years of going to film festivals and all that. But that's something, I mean, everybody knows I love the 48. So there you go. All right, now I'm going to keep pursuing the subject of history a bit with you, which is there a particular time period or culture that you go for? A lot of people focus on military history. You mentioned political history. Is that American politics? Is that all around the world? What interests you?
I guess the thing I focused on the most was probably 20th century American foreign policy. Because I think that has a pretty strong hand in terms of why the world is so fucked up as it is right now. Because after World War II, the United States was more or less the only superpower in the world that wasn't totally completely fucking deballed after the worst war in the entire history up to this point. And so many of the things and issues and why things are operating the way they are is because the United States got away pretty much unscathed. And so we were the ones who pretty much created the rules for what's happening now. And I mean, so much of that is, I'd say total lack of understanding of, economic systems beyond capitalism that made the United States so frightened of places that we thought were turning into communist states. And so so much of what's going on in the Middle East is because the United States decided that, well, we're terrified that they're becoming a communist state, so we have to kneecap them or decapitate them and, install, a dictator. And why the, quote-unquote adversaries we have right now in Russia and China, why they're so adversarial towards us is because, the United States has acted like we have to force our will on everyone else in the world because we were the ones who came out on top. And it's really hard for me to see a lot of kind of international politics and interplay beyond that sort of thing, because so much of that is born from that.
So you look, a lot of your interest in history, it sounds, is very geopolitical Like, not just the politics of the United States, but just like the relationships between the countries as well. Fascinating. So, 20th century, yeah, what a time to be alive. I myself was born in the late 1900s. So you start, well, not start, like, but you focus a lot on post-World War II, you'd say. What are some ways that you, these days in particular, study history? Is it mostly through reading, YouTube, like documentaries? How do you get your, what works for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I do read a lot. Whether that's through a lot of different like news sources or books or I can't really say magazines anymore because those are websites now. But I think one of the best resources that is available to anyone is PBS Frontline, which is like their PBS's main sort of like documentary vertical or whatever the hell word they use for it now. And I mean, there is it's horrifying, but it's a wonderful documentary about the Iraq and Iran war in the 1980s that really explains a lot of the tensions that are going on in the Middle East right now. And anything that PBS Frontline produces is some of the best journalism and best flat explanations of what is going on in the world right now.
Fascinating. So has any of, it could be this specifically, but I would imagine that your interest in history has affected your writing. I know that with there's a lot of the projects you've done have been more like sci-fi or fantasy with Theo and the Professor, etc. But have you done a historical project before?
So I would say that we haven't done a capital H historical project before, but I think every kind of project that you're going to spend some time on, 48's notwithstanding because you're very limited amount of time, but I think that there is a bit of like a historical review that you have to do whenever you're working on a project, if it's a short film, feature, series, whatever it might be, because you have to look at who these characters are, and
if it's not historical fiction and you're really like if you're depicting a president, or in a more difficult level, someone who maybe doesn't have as much information on them and footage as a president, there's other people in the cabinet or just like different levels of the military or whatever it is.
Well, I think it's like okay, we're making a short film. That might be a little bit longer, but it's set in 1990. Okay, who are the characters? You have a character who's 25, you have a character who's 45, you have a character who's these different ages, and it's like, okay, well, if it's set in 1990, where does that set their birth date? What sorts of things are influencing them? What sorts of things, might have, an impact on who they are as a character? What sorts of things might impact, what are the sorts of things that are weighing on their mind? If it's set in the 80s, you have a lot of everyone's thinking about literally the end of the world because of the Cold War. You know, if it's set after September 11th, people are thinking about terrorism, especially if it's like much closer to that date. And so, you know, those sorts of things, I think the historical context is what like really has like aided me in my perspective and like my, you know, like writing with things and like thinking and considering characters.
I think that's something that is unfortunately often absent from historical films, is not just the history that's being depicted in the film, which also is sometimes absent, but also because the history that the characters are aware of. Because in a lot of cases, you're making a historical film, and it's like the audience barely knows what this is about, let alone what another character might be referencing. That, you know, maybe everybody in the 70s knew about this particular thing that was, you know, really out there in pop culture, you know, but you know, someone today won't get that reference, and that can be tricky to have that be. Like, there's just less of an understanding there, so it can become more cumbersome to explain things. But it's cool when it does happen.
And I think it's not so much like, it's not so much that you know, the characters need or should reference things. It's just thinking about, you know, okay, if they were a teenager whenever Watergate was happening, how was that going to influence how they perceive or understand the world or like the events happening around them? You know,
how much they trust their government.
Yeah,
you know, like,
how much they trust authority, how much they trust, you know, anyone telling them to do anything, you know. And I think the best way to describe it is like when you really know your characters in like a project, whatever it might be. Like, you could imagine, like, you take two of your characters and you just drop them into a scenario, and you know how they're going to react. Like, somehow they end up in, you know, the DeLorean from Back to the Future, and they end up in the 1950s. You know how they're going to react, or, you know, talk to other characters or do other things. It's and that's, I think, when you really know what you got cooking.
Yeah. Are there any people or events or time periods that if you had if you could make any capital H history film, all right, is there one that comes to mind that you'd be interested in?
I would love to make a. So, do you play video games?
Some of them.
Are you familiar with Castlevania?
I've heard of it, but I haven't played it myself, but I'm kind of vaguely aware that there are vampires involved.
Right. It says this
Super Smash Brothers has some of the characters
right,
from it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's about this like, you know, long line of you know, vampire hunters who keep having to kill Dracula like over and over, and he keeps coming back like every 100 years.
It's
Son
like a
of a
bad
bitch.
penny. I just can't get rid of him. Yeah.
But yeah, I would, if I had unlimited resources, I would love to make a Castlevania movie set during World War II, maybe like early World War II before Pearl Harbor. And, you know, it's a...
Would this be taking place on, like, Eastern Front? Or, because if it's before Pearl Harbor, are you, like, talking about having it be in Eastern Europe?
It would be in Eastern Europe, but it would be kind of like Dracula's coming back, but it also has to be this... It's happening at the same time as, like, the Nazis are taking over a lot of, like, Eastern Europe. There's just so much... There's so much there.
Yeah.
I would love to... Yeah.
That does sound cool. Going back a little bit, the question was capital H history. So like non-fantasy related stuff. Is there for that? Any subject or character?
Do you mean like historical?
Yeah.
Or man. I don't know. It's like it's kind of hard for me because of as someone who like cares about history so much. Like
There's so much.
there's so much that's already been like said and done.
Mm-hmm.
That I all right. I'll say this. An actual kind of biographical film about Ronald Reagan.
Really? Like
Yeah.
his whole life or a particular...
Whole life.
Yeah? Fascinating. Well, there's been a bunch of presidents. Why him?
Because I think people should know, especially the people who revere him as much as they do, that it's just like all of politics. And I think that Ronald Reagan, for as much as I dislike him and hate him, was the one who created the current modern political atmosphere that we have, where it's all performative. I think a full, flat, on-the-line documentary about him would make people understand who this person was, what this person represented, what this person was after, which was their own self-aggrandizement.
And it sounds like you also said they're giving context to the like how Reagan affected the present political climate, like just how that's the reverberations, I guess.
Yeah, just kind of the more of the presentation matters more than what the policy actually matters.
So style kind of.
Yeah, it's
gotcha.
like
All right.
just the current like style presentation matters way more than the actual substance of what the impact of the policy is.
So going back now to your cool answer about Castlevania World War II, that sounds like you have an affinity, it seems to me, for monsters, cryptids, things like that. I know Jeff Smee knows more about cryptids than anybody I've met, which is saying something. Would you say that's accurate though? Like that you have do you like the Monster of the Week kind of thing? Are you a Doctor Who fan? That sort of.
I mean, yeah, like absolutely. Like, I will have to admit, I've never watched an episode of Doctor Who.
Oh, okay. There's a lot of them. So
there are a lot
to
of them.
get into.
But I would say that my mom and my Aunt Susan have like a big influence on my kind of entertainment sort of interest in terms of like when they were growing up, like they both watched like Dark Shadows, Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Night Gallery.
Oh, I've seen some of that.
Yeah, like things like that, and
probably Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone. Oh yeah, for sure.
Kind of be hard not to.
Yeah.
It's like I like sci-fi. I haven't seen Star Trek though.
Yeah, really. It's like what? And like I grew up watching, like the X-Files. The Are You Afraid of the Dark? Goosebumps, like all of those sorts of things. And it was just something about that sort of style or like area of, literature or like fiction and things like that that's always like hung with me because it just always felt like you can make up whatever you want and as long as it's interesting enough, people will watch it, or like people will also find it interesting. And I just always like the idea of, finding those things that, not in like the Stephen King way of like, finding those things that you're afraid of and really like hammering them, but it's just like, there are always going to be things that people are kind of like scared of or confused by, and what if you made it fun? Like, what if...
An adventure, perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. What if you could make it into an adventure?
Well, I can see that in some of the more recent work as well. Before we start here, we're talking a bit about the Cicada screening that Lance hosted, which I was very happy to attend. It was a very fun screening. Actually, one of the more enjoyable screenings that I've been to. Like, it wasn't technically, I guess, they say it's not really a film festival. I get that because there wasn't like, again. So Cicada is, for those of you at home, Cicada was just an event that happened recently here at the Oaks Theater in Pittsburgh. It was a screening of a bunch of films. A bunch of filmmakers were invited to show their films. So it was less of a, hey, submit competition thing, and more of, hey, here's a showcase of, local talent. And the thing that really made this screening stand out to me was the way that Lance hosted it. Was he had the filmmakers come up on stage right before screening their film, which I think the only reason why people don't normally do that is because they think, oh, well, don't talk about the film before you see it. It's going to spoil it or something like that. But it's really easy for people who know their film well to talk about it without spoiling it.
Exactly.
And I... loved that. It was so much better, like, getting to know the people involved. Sometimes it was the director, sometimes it was the composer or an actor. Someone came up, was interviewed for like a couple minutes, got a sense of who they were, a little bit of like what to expect with the film, and then we got to see the film. It made it so much more enjoyable. It broke it up so it wasn't just like a bunch of videos playing all at once, and then it's like, because normally you watch a whole bunch of films, and then there's a Q&A where people awkwardly pass the mic down and answer the same question 20 times. Or
people are like kind of awkwardly shuffling out of the theater because they're like, I'm kind of done.
Everyone's tired, And I think that was awesome. I loved that so much. It was so much better. It's like, because the event, it was... it went over a few hours, it's like, but it was so much more enjoyable that way.
I think it was like 2 hours and 20 minutes, but it didn't feel like it.
And there was some like just mixer time beforehand as well. Yep. So it was.
There was an intermission. That, kind of flowed and moved through pretty well.
And there's another one happening, which whenever it's coming up, I'll let y'all know because it's a cool event and I believe in it. But there's one of the films that was showcasing at Cicada. You were in. Ben Deedles was in at the end of Long Driveway. And forgive me, I don't recall the
Jess Euler.
I was going to say I don't remember the title.
The Stranger.
The Stranger.
But Jess Euler was the other actress.
Right.
Yep.
The thing that stood out, so that film really reflects a lot about what you were talking about with, like, hey, these strange things, making a bit of a, like, just keeping it interesting, making it an adventure. The thing that was my big takeaway from that film was there was a move in it that I'm not sure I've seen another film do, which, the vertigo effect of, like, zoom in, dolly
like
out,
Jaws.
or vice versa. Yeah, exactly. My favorite version is in The Fellowship of the Ring when Frodo looks down the road before the Nazgul shows
Get
up.
off the road!
And it just looks crazy, and you're like, what am I looking at? I think that's and it's wonderful because it's like anyone could have done that exactly the same way over the past 100 years. But what y'all did was the reverse of that, where it starts with this like weird wide look because your character is having this strange experience and getting like psyching himself out and all that, and then it shifted into a more normal framing, like you came out of it, and I was like, that was awesome. I loved that. I would be amazed if no one's done that before, but I don't remember seeing it. And it fits so perfectly with the moment of like your character like focusing in on something and then getting called out of it for a moment. It's like, and it was funny. Like it was awesome. I loved that. It was so creative. So that wasn't a question. It was just saying like, hey, love that.
Well, hey, I'm glad you loved it.
Now, but that brings us also into acting.
Yeah.
All right. Had you done before you started getting to, like you were talking about, you and Lance talking about, hey, let's actually make something.
Mm-hmm.
Had you done any acting before? Any like school plays or anything?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much just like stage acting.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done some, high school play, high school musical. I'd done some, community theater kind of stuff, but nothing, no film acting.
Do you prefer film acting
Yes.
to stage? Yeah?
Yes.
What about that different environment? Because even though they're both acting, they're totally different processes of work. Like even if there is overlap for like what acting is and getting into character, learning your lines and all that, but like one of them has an audience and one of them has a crew. One of them is all in one shot. One of them is a lot of start and stop. What is it about film, performing, acting in film that appeals to you?
To be completely honest, I think it's actually having something you're going to show to people who weren't at the initial performance.
Mm-hmm.
That, hey, I made this thing 5 years ago. You want to see it? Watch it right now. Whereas, I can be like, yeah, I played the mayor in The Music Man in 2004. It's like, okay, cool. Like, yep. Like
you should have been there.
Yeah, and that's
it's the 240p video of it on YouTube
and
that sounds
I also
terrible.
think that it's. I also think that it's kind of like. I think a lot of theater, musicals, opera, ballet, that sort of thing that happens. It's only there for a certain segment of the public. Because one, it has to be for a certain segment of the public who can afford it, and for the certain segment of the public who has an interest. And I think that film kind of transcends a lot of that, and that, if you are trying to make a piece of art that can kind of like bridge all of those gaps, like people who literally just have a cell phone and can watch it, or people who have like their own home theater system, you're able to allow your art to be exposed to all of them. And I also just think that film is the kind of, like, it's an actual pastiche of all of the like creative arts all in one, where it could be, it's acting, it's lighting, it's choreography, it's
music,
writing, it's music, it's cinematography, it's, like all of these things all come to like editing and like all of these different areas. And then you get this like lovely, wonderful thing that everyone who's involved in the project can be like, I did that. And, I think that's part of why I love film so much, where anyone who's involved in the project, I think everyone can just kind of say like, oh yeah, I did that. It's like, yeah. Like, yeah, you did do that. And like, it's not you were just a PA. You were just like a grip. You just help with the lighting. It's like, oh no, you did do that. Because if you weren't a part of that project, it wouldn't have been this thing that we can all enjoy and appreciate right now.
Being able to reproduce and distribute it is such a powerful part of the medium, because you can spend $300 million making a movie that I can see for like $12. You know, anyone around the country can. You know, it's like, or you can even have just right in your home with streaming service. You know, that's do you enjoy live theater though?
No, I do. I do.
As an audience member, I'd say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say that, like, for me, like, I appreciate the amount of, like, effort and artistry and everything else that goes into it. It's just that for all of that effort, the audience that you're going to be delivering that art to is always going to be very, very limited.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even whenever, you know, different companies will do kind of we're releasing the whatever, like, film version of this play or this. It's just not the same thing. I mean, it's kind of like going to, like, a live sporting event versus watching it from home.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, technically the same thing, but it's not like the same thing.
It's a very different experience, because you do get the replay, you do get the commentary, you know,
Yeah.
even, you know, sometimes the commercials are part of the experience, you know, depending on which game it
Right,
is.
right.
But yeah, it is different enough too, and they both have their strengths. I almost don't want to call them weaknesses in some ways, because
I agree.
like, cause it's like with, like, I get and agree with what you're saying about film. But it's also like one of the things that I also, and probably you also, find exciting about live theater is, like, I'm here now and this is the only time this is happening. Like, even if they're going to perform it again tomorrow, it's going to be different somehow, you know. It's like someone might trip and fall or just do it a little differently, whatever it is. And that's part of what does make it exciting, but also frustrating, because there's, like, I wish I had gotten to see a production of Camelot with the original Broadway cast with Richard Burton and Julie Andrews. I'm never going to get to see that. You know, I think there might be an archive film somewhere. I'm not sure. I've listened to the soundtrack, but it's like there's a version with Richard Harris, you know, and that's nice, you know, but I want, it's frustrating, because it's like, and even if I saw, like, a really well-produced Broadway film thing, it's like, it's not going to be the same as being there. But one of the magical things about live theater is even just a perfect example of what we were talking about. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was the day or the week or what, it was, this kind of comes full circle with political history too. Shortly after JFK had been shot, there was a production of Camelot. It was on Broadway at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this really famous story in the Broadway world of how a lot of people have referred to JFK's administration at the time as Camelot. And even in Forrest Gump, when Forrest Gump goes to the White House when JFK's the president, some of the incidental music that's playing like is from the Camelot Broadway soundtrack. Right. You know, they don't draw too much attention to it, but if you know, it's really a clever, poignant, you know, just, it's one of the reasons why it's a great movie is because of stuff like that. It's obviously awesome, and there's stuff like that. But when they did Camelot, shortly after JFK was shot, there was this performance, and a lot of that show, people related to what the country was going through, how there was this, a lot of people talk about it as a loss of innocence, you know, or the end of an era. Like, it's a hugely monumental, it's not just he was assassinated, like that in itself is sad enough, but it's like there's just so much that, traumatized the country, with it, and that people related to with that show. And from what I recall from the story, after they finished the musical, the cast didn't even come out for its final bow. Like it would, like there was something different happened at the end of it, and it became this a legendary moment in Broadway history for that. And it's like, man, I'm never going to be a part of that experience, and that's part of what's magical about live theater. But I can watch Casablanca, or I can watch Gone with the Wind, or whatever classic it is, and go on that journey. And it's weird how even though movies don't change unless it's been edited for a special release or
unless
something.
you're watching it in a different context or a different time.
Yeah, it's like, it can.
It's the first time you're seeing it, and it's whatever the year it is.
Yeah.
And you get that new experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the way that it's crazy how, Gone with the Wind is a great example of, depending on which time period you're watching it in, can affect the way you see it, because a lot of the way that film was designed was to relate for people with going through the Depression. That's a big part of why that film was such a big deal when it came out. Sorry, I just love talking film history. My bad. But
no, it's all good.
Yeah, now are there? I like this back and forth here, like talking about history with film and all that. Are there any do you like historical films? Like, what do you have any favorites?
Yeah,
Does it annoy you when they're inaccurate? How do you feel about that kind of thing?
I mean, Saving Private Ryan rips. I feel like a lot of period films resonate with me more than something that's like, oh, we're trying to kind of replicate what's going on.
I see.
So, I mean, one of my favorite movies, top three, is L.A. Confidential.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's one of those like perfect movies, because like the story's great, the setting is perfect. It's really focusing on the sorts of things that people are having a lot of, concerns, paranoia about, where you want to trust the institutions that are supposed to be in charge and in control, but you really can't. And it's about a couple of people who are trying to kind of like rip it all down. Let me think.
So it's like a period piece with it's got that big picture element, but it does tell a individual personal story.
I mean, it's the same reason why I love like Chinatown. It's the same.
That's why I was thinking, as you were talking about, I'm like, yeah, I bet you like Chinatown a lot.
Yeah.
Hot take, I guess.
Right. I'd also say No Country for Old Men. I think a lot of those movies where people are really struggling to find faith in things that are outside of their control, whether it's like institutions, like the government, the authority, the whatever it might be, because I think that's just a common thread throughout the entirety of history. Like, unless you're in charge, which is like, that kind of like great man kind of history of like, oh, this is why things happen, because, Hoover was president, and then Roosevelt, and then, Truman, and then Eisenhower, and then, Kennedy, but then Kennedy was killed, and then it was, I feel like there's a lot more resonance with the fact that people don't really have a lot of like faith or trust in that, like, there are people behind the wheel, and if there are, they actually care about you.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time, the people behind the wheel feel like they have no control of what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, which is also wild when, like, you hear about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
And, like, the amount of stress that everybody in the room is under. It's like, these are the people who get to make the decisions. But, like, they're also like, this is going to fall apart any second here. You know, it's like,
yeah.
I mean, that's an extreme situation, but yeah, it's like getting it when you're in charge, trying to get people to do what you want is almost impossible.
I think that, because like I said, I work at the University of Pittsburgh and, so, work with a lot of like, a lot of smart 18, 22-year-olds, and, whenever they're graduating, they'll be like, hey, do you have any advice, or do you have any, and I'm just like, my best advice is to understand as quickly as possible that you're making it up, and so is everyone else. And I think that's the terrifying thing when you're thinking about world leaders, because they're all making it up too. And, thinking that anyone else has it totally figured out, that's a fool's errand.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a nice drop of wisdom to leave us with this evening. Coasting for a nice landing there. So, Matt, thank you very much for joining me. Is there anything that, so we're going to have links in the description. Why don't you tell people back home some of the things that they're going to find down there?
Yeah, so me and my friend at Filmmakers, like I mentioned before, we've been doing this for over a decade at this point. You can find most of our projects on YouTube at Locust Street Media. Locust Street is the name of our kind of production group. So a lot of our shorts, Theo and the Professor, can be found there. You can also find us on Amazon Video. You can find Theo and the Professor there. You can also find the feature-length film The Boonies on Amazon, as well as other streaming services. And we have a bunch of other stuff cooking up.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thanks for being my guest. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. I should have you back sometime, and because I feel like we could just talk forever about all this stuff.
There's I got a lot of kooky things. Don't worry.
Nice, awesome. All right, well, next time or sometime between, perhaps. All right,
right on.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us once again on this special episode of the StudioMEcast. Don't forget that you can book this space if you like the look and sound of it for your own podcast. If you've been here before, we'd love to see you again. And also, don't forget the meetup space is in Oakland. It's ready for use. It's already had some bookings, and people are very happy with it. We're very excited about how well it's gone over. If you look at your screen, you'll see a couple, wow, look at that. Doesn't that look nice? You could talk there. Doesn't that look great? B-roll is wonderful. Anyway, I'm back. So, thanks for joining us. If you're the type to subscribe, please do. But whatever the case, we hope to see you next time, because we'll be here. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time. You can't have it back. Bye-bye. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to start your own podcast, why wait? Reach out to us at StudioME.me, and I hope you hear me again soon.